text yesterday. I guess she was out running some errands, and she happened to be she drove by a gas station. I think it was in LA County, and took a picture, and it showed $7.39 for regular gas. That is insane.
Well, and that's the thing too. People are not talking about that in the news, that prices, obviously prices have to go up. The cost of per barrel has skyrocketed the last month. So obviously at the pump
Mhm.
it has to go up, but you're not seeing that in the news. Nobody's talking about that prices are hitting, the highs again. And I haven't seen anything that high. That's probably, kind of Malibu beach area where you got all the rich fucks anyways living that can afford that type of thing. All right, welcome back everybody to the Half Truth, where we talk about the half truth behind the most popular news articles that we found this past week. So I got a one or two, and I know Justin's got one. So let's dive right into it. Justin, why don't you kick it off with yours?
Okay, mine's going to talk about the Fed and lowering interest rates. So the article is titled "Why the Fed is Wading into Uncharted Waters," the morning brief. And they try and give a compelling argument as to why the Fed is going to be lowering or having a rate cut potentially later this year. A decent argument. However, I lean the other direction. I don't think the Fed's going to make any cuts. I think they would if they needed to, if there was bigger problems, and it seems like there aren't any bigger problems behind the scenes. So, I think it's like in one of our previous videos, I talked a little bit about how I think this might be a change where, I think interest rates are going to be higher for longer and potentially maybe even over the longer term go higher. If you look at kind of the macro cycle, the 30,000 foot view, I'll say it again that from, what was it, from 1940 to 1980, 40 years. We had rising interest rates, and then from the 80s, basically from when Patrick and I were born, all the way till the end of 2022, or sorry, end of 2020, we had declining interest rates. So, there was another 40-year gap of declining interest rates with some, little things here and there where they had to raise interest rates temporarily. But the overall trend over the 40 years was down. I think we've reached, the bottom. I don't think we're ever going to see. I mean, I would sure love to have a mortgage at 3%, but I don't think that's going to be in my cards or anybody else buying a home for the foreseeable future. They did go into some things, that we're talking about, how the S&P and the Fed funds rate, over the last, 40 years. And again, all it shows is that, the interest rates, or at least the Fed funds rate, was declining with a slight uptick over the last, 18 to 24 months. So, I mean, again, half truth, I would just be leery of people talking about how the Fed's going to cut rates later this year. Usually they would do that if there were some bigger problems that were going on. And at least at this moment, I think Patrick would agree. There is no reason to cut rates at this present moment. I don't think there's any bigger substantial issues. At least not anything that I'm seeing for them to go ahead and cut rates to make things, cheaper for everybody. So, I would, you'll get a chance to see the video and that they have on that article. I just argue that I just don't see it. And I could be wrong, but the days of 3% interest rates, I think, are behind us. We may come back to 5 or something like that, but going all the way to where we were, close to zero, is pretty much, in my opinion, null and void.
Well, and this kind of plays into the article that I have too. But the market has baked in, the 3, 4 rate cuts that they're projecting the second half of the year, and that's kind of why we're still bullish or bearish on the market. because they've already anticipated that those cuts are coming in, and we don't feel that they will. So that might have some downward pressure on the market when people finally realize that that's not going to happen. Because, like you said, the only reason that they would cut rates is because we're at the 2% inflation or below, which my article kind of we're going to talk about that that's probably not going to happen, or there's a problem going on, because otherwise what other reason do they have other than the fact that our debt is too expensive, so they're going to get some pressure. And I think we might get one rate cut this year, like late December, November, maybe, either because we're in there's an issue going on, or they're going to do it just to kind of keep the party going type of deal. Because when history has shown that when they do cut rates, that's very advantageous for the market, and the market rallies extensively. So there is a bull case and a bear case for whether either direction that the Fed goes with this. But yeah, I'm in agreement that there's no rhyme or reason to them cutting the rates right now. They can just keep them where they're at. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing that says they got to go up or they got to go down.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's very easy for them to just be like, do nothing. Everything seems to be, in a lack of better word, equilibrium.
Yeah, well, and on the surface, that it's
Right.
killing businesses, small business owners. It's killing, and like you said, because people are not used to this. For the last how many years, like you said, we've been in descending rates, or kind of in a range below 3%, and now here we are above that, and we feel it's going to get worse as far as rates go, and that's just going to decimate things if that happens. My article is housing market playing a big role in the Fed's inflation fight. And the reason for that is because prices are not going to come down. If rates do come and cut, then we're going to have an influx of buyers. I mean, you said yourself, you want a lower rate, you're looking to buy a house, you want a lower rate. Well, if rates come down, on the Fed side, and it reduces then the mortgage rates, let's say from 7 down to 6, that's going to spark a degree of buyers. If it goes from 6 to 5, that's going to spark even more degree of buyers. So
Yep.
by the Fed cutting rates, it's going to have an advantage to more buyers, more housing prices. We already have oil going through the roof. So those two things that they take out of the inflation gauge, but the Fed still monitors, still watches, because it has a huge part in our economy. That's going to just skyrocket and keep inflation numbers higher. The other aspect of this I wanted to talk about is the commission thing that has been hitting the news, but I'll let you comment on the housing fight first before I get into that.
Yeah, so I mean, to your point, yes, if they were to lower rates by, 1% or possibly 1.5%, you would definitely start to see more buyers. But the flip side of that is all of the, Zillow or Redfin, anytime you've been watching houses and you've seen price cuts, well, all of a sudden you're going to see price increases. You can't have both. Yes, I would love to have a 3% mortgage on a house that's been cut in half, but that's not how it works.
But
So yes, as much
those price cuts are not legitimate price cuts. Those are people who are shooting for the moon. They have an
yeah,
$800,000 home, which is the true where they're going to get buyers, but they're like, oh my God, this is a buyer, seller's market, so I'm going to ask 1 million. So those price
yep.
cuts are just overzealous buyers. They're not a true reflection of the market.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And even when I have seen the price cuts, whether it's, here in Texas or in California, the two markets that I know I know a decent amount about, to your point, even if there was a price cut, it was already an inflated price. And if they do give a price cut, it's like less than 5%.
Yeah.
So, they're waiting for some schmuck to come in, after, to your point, if it's truly an $800,000 house and they're listing it for 1 million, they'll drop it by, 995,000. and some schmuck might come in and purchase it at that price, and then they're going to be paying on a 7% mortgage, and their mortgage is going to be, close to 10 grand a month.
Yeah. Well, and that
So
goes
that would
into,
just be my comments on that.
and that kind of the price cutting leads into the other aspect of this that's been in the news kind of the last couple of weeks is getting rid of the 6% commission from
Yeah.
realtors. And people think that that's going to reduce the price of houses, and there's no way. Like, the sellers could care less. If they're paying less in commissions, they're just going to pocket the extra money. But that 6% commission is really convoluted in how the whole industry works, because the realtors have always kind of been negotiating, or you've had the ability to negotiate the commission rate on that you pay a realtor. So that flat 6% has never really existed. It's, if you've been wise and talked it over with your realtor, can get 4. But where it really causes some concern and issue is on the buyer side, because now the buyer's agent doesn't really know what they're going to get paid. So they have to, work that out and figure that out a little bit differently, because there is a lot of work that buyers have to go into, a buyer agent has to go into to be able to assist um, people to buy homes. So they have to negotiate that aspect out of things, because it's not going to be as cut and dry and clear for the buyer side. Seller side, nothing's really going to change for a seller agent. But even if it does drop, like the seller, takes a cut, that's not going to change the housing prices. That it's going to get lost in the market of people taking the cash and walking away with it. So there's really no change. There's no benefit to anybody out there, other than it's just going to cause more confusion in the market until they kind of get it figured out of how it's going to work. And then there'll be a new norm that's going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about you, but anytime I've ever, purchased any real estate, I've never seen anybody I know who's purchased or sold real estate. I don't know any one person that's ever paid a total of 6%.
Yeah.
You I mean, I just so when I heard that, when I saw some of that, and that's why we have our show, because there's a lot of clickbait. It's trying to
Hmm.
just drive a narrative that really, to your point, Patrick, just doesn't exist. I mean,
Right.
it's, yes, if you're the seller, you're going to sell it and you're going to pocket more cash. Perfect. That's a win for them.
Yeah.
And yes, on the buyer side, a little bit more difficult because they got to do a little bit more work. But yeah, I mean, back to the original point of, I don't know, again, whenever I've purchased any real estate, my folks have ever purchased real estate, for you or any of my friends, I don't know anybody that's ever paid, north of like, I've seen like 4.5, something like that.
Well, but you have to keep in mind that that's, typical California. I've seen 6%, in the Midwest, where houses are lower value. So
Right,
they have to charge a higher commission, because there's the same amount of work that goes into buying that house that's $200,000 versus, a
right,
$1 million home out here. So I have seen it, for that regards, but it's compensating for the work that in the value of the home.
right,
But it just goes into, why I agree with my article of, the Feds has the fight with inflation of housing prices. That is a huge determining factor. The fact of just being undersupplied in every single market across the US, it's going to have a huge impact on them cutting rates, because if they cut rates, that's just going to drive that up even higher. There's no way around it's going to have an effect on the housing prices. So if you own your home and you're looking to sell, you're going to be in a very good position, because I don't see, unless we have unemployment spiking, which I've said from how many years now, we're not going to see a downward trend in prices, like a true downward trend in prices.
Yeah, the unemployment thing's a real interesting one. I guess maybe I'll have to find an article on that one for next week. Because yeah, I
Well,
mean,
not,
you would think. I mean, sorry.
go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, you would think. When I talk to friends, I talk to people, I go to certain events. It seems like everybody kind of seems to be struggling. I see small articles about layoffs. But then when the numbers come out, now granted, we've argued that the numbers are usually skewed anyways, and they usually come in about 2 or 3 months later, adjusted to what they actually are.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, the unemployment numbers haven't really, grown significantly, at least in the last, 18 months, at least not in the way that we thought it might.
Well, and some of that now is going to be affected by immigration. We've had
Yeah,
a huge shift in the type of immigration that we have. Like we no longer have the skilled immigration coming in. We have the unskilled immigration, which is to some extent is needed because it's got to backfill a lot of jobs. California just went to $20 an hour. So companies are closing, people are getting fired, because the businesses, the restaurants can't afford to pay that. And so that they'll be able to kind of sub some of those type of jobs. I'm not saying the restaurant industry, but other jobs where they can pay a lower wage to these undocumented immigrants that are coming into the country, to kind of help fight some of that unemployment, which is going to show an uptick in unemployment numbers, in the unskilled kind of realm of things. But it also plays into my other article that I had that I wanted to talk briefly. Barry Dillard thinks that companies will move to a standard of 4 days in the office with Fridays flexible. And this has also been part of the unemployment issue, in the fact of part-time jobs have been increasing, and that's kind of what's been holding up the unemployment numbers, because a lot of people in the US have two jobs. They got their regular job, or for the most part, and then a part-time job. Well, if we go to a 4-day work week, that's just going to increase the ability to have a part-time job, because people are going to, if they're working from home, they're going to be working another job on the same type of thing. So if that's the move that they make, and Barry Dillard's not the only one that said this. There's been a couple articles and a couple people coming out and saying, we should be doing 4-day work weeks and things like that, which other places in the rest of the world do. But on those other days, people take off. They don't work another job, whereas we're going to be working. A lot of Americans are going to be working another job, which is going to keep our unemployment rate low.
yeah, yeah, I agree. Well, and that $20 an hour thing is pretty wild. I know we talked about it in one of our other half truths. The data, literally the data, and perhaps we just should. I'll go find that chart, um, where it shows that the vast majority of people who go into a job at the bottom or entry level position, the data shows that within 6 months to 18 months, that person is either moved on to a better job that's paying more money, or has moved up in the position, moved up within the company that is paying more money. They don't
Mhm.
stay real stagnant, unless you're like 16 or something. And even then, most people that are between 16 and 18 getting their first job, they usually are moving on to something different within, again, 6 to 18, maybe 24 months. So the idea that increasing minimum wage to a what they call quote unquote livable wage, is only going to affect the consumer, not you
Right.
know in
Well, and the
business
businesses,
itself.
yeah, and the business,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Well,
So it's all
I was
ass
just in
backwards.
Hawaii. I was just in Hawaii and asked, there was, how they have the self-checkout lanes, we have them here. They have them in
Mhm.
Hawaii too, obviously. And so I asked the guy, because everything is just, exorbitantly expensive out there, just like the dumbest things are twice the price. And I asked the guy, I'm like, how much do you make? It's the one that's just monitoring the self-checkout. And he said starting wage is over $20 an hour. And all he's doing is standing around watching things. So yeah, he's made, granted, he needs that because everything's expensive, and it's a snowball effect. Everything's expensive because the store's got to pay so much for him to just stand there and watch people check out, so he's got to have a higher wage to be able to afford to kind of live there. But it just that should not be a $20 an hour like wage. It's just un unfathomable that is where
Yeah,
we're at, and that's where California is heading.
yeah, a lot of places. I mean, just think about it. $20 an hour, everybody's going to charge more. So now you're $20 an hour. You're still at the same position you were before. You
Yep.
still can't afford the things that you think you can afford with a higher wage because everybody else is raising their prices.
Yep.
It makes no sense.
In and out for the first time in a long time, like right, when the change hit of the $20 an hour, you saw the menu went up 20 cents, 30 cents for each, burger type of thing. So it's like it's people that are voting for it are ended up having to pay for it. So
Yeah, I think I saw on Twitter it was like what was it? April, the end of April, the last day of April. It showed prices at
March,
In and
last day
Out.
of March.
Or
Yeah.
sorry, yes, yeah, excuse me. At the end of March, prices were this. April 1st, prices were this.
Yep.
Increase.
Yep.
Idiots. And I'm no genius. Let me preface with that. I am no genius, but this is not rocket science.
Yep. Well, and the petroleum reserve, that's the topic for another time.
Yeah.
That's going to screw us again. And oil prices are just that's why inflation. We are in the 80s all over again with inflation. We're going to be in stagflation and then inflation again.
Yeah, one really quick thing. My mom sent me a text yesterday. I guess she was out running some errands and she happened to be she drove by a gas station. I think it was in LA County. And took a picture and it showed $7.39 for regular gas. That is insane.
Well, and that's the thing too. People are not talking about that in the news, that prices, obviously prices have to go up. The cost of per barrel has skyrocketed the last month. So obviously at the pump
Mhm.
it has to go up, but you're not seeing that in the news. Nobody's talking about that prices are hitting, the highs again. And I haven't seen anything that high. That's probably, kind of Malibu beach area where you got all the rich fucks anyways living that can afford that type of thing. Um, but I've definitely seen an uptick in the prices at the pump, and we're going to see that, even more if something doesn't happen, and as we head into summer travel and all that type of stuff. So
Yeah, I mean, there's been a little uptick here in Texas. You can still find it where, it's when I first got here, I was able to find it as low as like $2.39, 29 cents, something like that. And then now, that you see it at like the lowest I've seen is like 2.79, 2.89. But if depending on where you're going, you're seeing it over $3. It's like 2.99 or 3.19 or 3.09,
hmm,
somewhere in there. So there's been a little uptick here, but obviously not not California
yeah,
prices. Part of the
yeah.
reason why I left. One
Well,
of
and some
one
of
of many.
yeah, some of that is conditioning, as people, it's like I
Totally.
remember when it was below a dollar, and then the
Mhm.
first time it got above a dollar, everybody was in rage and boycotting and pissed off and everything. And then it kind of hovered around there. People got used to it, and then it went up to $1.50, and less people bitched. And now we're at $5 out here is kind of the average,
Yep.
and if it goes to 5.50, oh, okay, no big deal. If it goes to 6, this sucks, but people are getting conditioned to that pricing. So
Yeah, I
yeah.
mean, to your point, they're normalizing it. Like I
Yep.
noticed that. So, like I remember, pre-pandemic, you could find like $3.49, $3.79 gas. Those were pretty good deals. And then the pandemic hit, and through the pandemic, and some of that prices started to go up. And I said to everybody at that time, I was like, my first mark was they're normalizing $4. It kept going, and I'm like, nope, they're going to normalize $5. And it pretty much,
Yep.
now I hear from like Colby, or some of my other friends, like when they find it under $5, like they're like up, they're jumping for joy. You know? So it's like
Yep.
like you said, they're normalizing $5 at this point. So
Yep.
they're letting all the people bitch about it for a year, 2 years, and then it's just going to be $5 gas, and everybody's
Yeah.
going to accept it, and it's dumb, and there should be no
Well,
reason for it, especially in
right.
California.
We still have, well, California has their special gas bullshit that they utilize, which does nothing, I'm sure, but it costs extra. But we're still cheaper than the rest of the world, when it comes to gas, because we pay
Yeah,
per gallon versus per liter. But We
Yes.
still much lower than what other people pay. So we really don't have a gripe to be complaining, but it's hard when you're used to it. Yeah.
Yeah, so I had a dumb moment because I wasn't thinking about over when I went on my honeymoon. We were in Italy, and I was like driving by the gas stations. I'm like, oh man, wow, this is so cheap. And the light bulb didn't go off right away, and then I was like, oh yeah, per liter, not per gallon. Because we rented a car when we got into Italy, and I was driving around, and I had to fill it up I think once or twice, and I was like that. Finally, the light bulb went off, and I was like, yeah. I guess gas is cheap back home.
Yep. So, well, thank you everybody for tuning in to the Half Truth, and we'll see you again next week.
Thank you, everybody.